Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. In the near future, we know that we're getting some really exciting licensed games. Things like Machine Games doing Indiana Jones, or IO Interactive doing James Bond. Hell, even Game Freak is finally making Pokemon Legends Arceus, which looks like it's going to be the open world Pokemon game that we've all wanted for so long, assuming that it runs well. And it got me thinking, what are some other franchises that have real untapped potential in video games? And what better way to present my thoughts than in a good old fashioned numbered list? So, like, share, subscribe. Let's get into it. Number 10, in no particular order, is Dungeons and Dragons. And I know what you're thinking. There's already so many Dungeons and Dragons video games, and you're right. You know, you've got Baldur's Gate, you've got Neverwinter, you've got Dark Alliance, and all those games are really good. I really love them, don't get me wrong, but I feel like they all kind of get bogged down in trying to be exactly like the tabletop game, and that's just not possible. In a tabletop game, you can do anything that your imagination and the luck of the dice allow you to do, and it's just not possible to program in every single thing that anybody playing your game could possibly think of to do. It's just not possible. There's no way to do it. So why bother trying? Just give me a highly focused narrative story in the D&D universe. And here's the thing. So many really amazing D&D narratives already exist, and they're already written like games because they're games. Just do Curse of Strahd, but have it look like The Last of Us. Do Tomb of Annihilation, but have it feel like Tomb Raider. There's dozens of amazing D&D campaign books that could, with a little bit of tweaking, be adapted into some amazing video games. I would play a Descent of Avernus game right now, no problem. Wouldn't even think about it. And here's the thing, if you wanted to tell an entirely unique story on the off chance that somebody had already played all of the existing D&D campaign books, you could just tap somebody like Chris Perkins, the guy who writes a lot of those books, or Matt Mercer, who writes one of the most popular D&D campaigns ongoing right now, and have them come in and just have them write or help write a campaign for your game. You could even have the actors who play the characters in the game just play it as a tabletop game first, and have that become sort of the narrative of what happens in the game, you know? Or, you know, if you've already got Matt Mercer there, just bring in the Critical Role cast. Those are some of the most talented voice actors in the video games industry. You've got people like Liam O'Brien, Laura Bailey, Matt Mercer. Just every single one of them is extremely talented. And I mean, like, look at Laura Bailey. She, just last year, won an award for being the best voice actor in the industry for Abby, and if from The Last of Us 2. And if she can make a character like Abby, who's really kind of a piece of shit, but make that character still lovable to the point where, you know, it's the best character of the year, imagine what she could do if you just made a video game where she's playing as the same character from Critical Role, who she's been playing and living as for like 5 years. It would just be amazing, and I don't know why, honestly, it hasn't been done yet. Number 9, while we're on the topic of Wizards of the Coast, is Magic the Gathering. And again, there are already video games of Magic the Gathering, but they're just exactly the card game. You're just literally laying down cards and playing it like you would if you were in person. But there's so much lore to the world of Magic the Gathering. You could pick any planeswalker, basically, and just tell their story, and it would be amazing. Or any plane. Just do Innistrad and talk about Soren and my girl Avacyn, and the whole situation with the Hell Vault would be an absolutely amazing story, and nobody even knows that it exists because there are Magic the Gathering books that you can read, but most of the lore just comes from flavor text on the cards, but it's still there. If you can find dozens of YouTube channels where they break down the story of each individual planeswalker and character from the card game, but 99% of people, I would imagine, even who play the card game, don't know those stories. But it's probably the most popular card game in the world. So if you just took those characters and put them in a video game, it would sell like crazy. Like if you just made a game where you play as a Johnny or Jace, like I can't imagine a world in which that game doesn't sell, as long as it's well made and preferably has more of a single player narrative focus. I think that it could be something really special. Number 8 is Warhammer Fantasy. And again, yes, there are already games that exist in this universe. You've got things like Vermintide and Total War Warhammer, and I love both of those games. They're absolutely amazing. But you don't get a sense of the narrative. You don't really get a huge understanding of the lore just from playing those games. But if you take a look at the map of Warhammer Fantasy and you point to any location on that map, there's a story waiting to be told there. Or you could adapt the story from the Gotrek and Felix novels and just tell that, and it would be an excellent game. You could tell about Manfred and the Vampire Wars. You could talk about Karl Franz and his whole deal with the Elector Counts. Or you could tell an untold story, a completely unique one. Tell about some Kislev soldiers who are fighting against chaos. Talk about some high elves who are going out to recover ancient artifacts, or just Skaven who are just screwing around doing Skaven shit. There's so much potential in the Warhammer Fantasy universe, and again, much like Magic the Gathering, most of people don't know anything about this world. In fact, probably even the people who play the tabletop game, there's probably a good chunk of them who really don't care about the lore. They just, paint the figures and play the game. But there's so much that you could do with this amazing, breathing fantasy world, and I feel like just no one has taken advantage of it yet. Number 7 is One Piece. This is one of the most popular ongoing graphic novel series of all time. It's only beaten in terms of sales by Batman, Superman, and Spider-Man, which puts it in some really great company, and yet the only games that are ever made from the One Piece license are either Muso-style Warriors games or a handful of really scattershot but always low-quality games like, what was it, like Pirate Carnival or whatever, just really not great games. And it's a shame, because the One Piece universe is so well thought out and so heavily connected and has some amazing characters, but at the same time, it could be absolutely anything. There's so much possibility with it. You could tell the story of an entirely new pirate crew, who is going on their own adventure. You could just tell the story of a single island who isn't related to the story of the anime, and just have that be enough. Or you could even flip the script and sort of play as a marine, or maybe follow one of the other crews who we don't really get to see a lot of, like what was going on with the Kid Pirates, what was Trafalgar Law doing for the first 600 episodes of the show. Just don't tell the story of the Straw Hat Pirates. That story has already been told, and you could probably tell it again in a video game in a more heavily focused narrative way, but you don't need to, because that story already exists. You don't need to shoehorn in as many One Piece characters as possible just to get this thing to sell. Just put in the ones that make sense. If the story takes place in the East Blue, maybe you stop in at the Baratier and you see Zeph. If you are a pirate crew and you go over the Grand Line, you know you're going to pass by Crocus, so may as well meet him in Laboon. But just tell an entirely unique story in this amazingly colorful and vibrant anime world, and I can't imagine how, if you got the right team behind it, how it could possibly be bad. Number 6 is Percy Jackson. This is one of the more popular YA novels for my age group. Basically, everyone who I went to middle school with had read at least some of these books, and yet there are no video games related to it whatsoever. And it's such an interesting world. You know, if you don't know, it's basically there's this camp where demigods, people who are half god, half mortal, go to sort of be protected from the magical creatures of the Greek mythological pantheon, while also sort of learning how to hone their powers and become heroes. And the way that this sort of plays out setting-wise is that it's basically just old Greek mythology, but just retold in a modern American setting. And it's really funny. You know, you've got things like the Medusa, who she like makes lawn ornaments by freezing animals and she sells them on the side of the road, and just all kinds of really goofy things like that. But at the same time, it can get really dark and heavy, you know? So it's a really interesting world, and the thing about it is, in canon, we already have this system by which monsters who are defeated sort of come back after a certain amount of time. And so you could tell just a completely unique story in the world of Percy Jackson with a completely new cast of characters, but still maybe at Camp Half-Blood and still in America. And you wouldn't even have to worry about things like, oh, well, we can't use the Minotaur because Percy kills the Minotaur in the first book. Like, you don't have to worry about any of that. So you could tell, like, Greek heroes in World War II America, like the 50s, or you could do, like, a Stranger Things thing, but it's Greek mythology in small-town America. Like, there's so many different things that you could do with this IP, and just no one has done anything. Like, there's the books, and they're amazing, and there's the movies, and they're not. But outside of that, I don't think there's absolutely anything taking advantage of this really interesting and well thought out universe. And it's a huge shame. Number 5 is Warcraft, and I know what you're gonna say. Daniel, you ignorant slut. Warcraft is literally a video game franchise. How could it possibly have untapped potential as a video game? And here's the thing. Here's my problem with Warcraft as a franchise. Is much like most of the things above it on this list, it as a world has so much lore and character building and interesting things going on in the narrative, but the majority of the people who play that game, the World of Warcraft, don't care about the lore because it's buried in these really dense text blocks that most people probably don't even bother reading. You know, a new expansion comes out and you play through the story content really fast, maybe even skipping the cutscenes just to level up, and then you're right back doing dungeons and grinding mythics, trying to get your gear score up as high as possible so that you can, you know, raid, because for most people that's what World of Warcraft is. And it's a shame, because somebody has put a huge amount of work into the story of these characters. You can make a really amazing, focused narrative story that tells the story of Thrall, or Jaina Proudmoore, or Illidan, or Arthas, you know, but just nobody has since the RTS days. You got a lot more lore from those, but they're so long ago that I wouldn't imagine that most people playing video games today have even touched them. And I can't say that I blame them, because those games don't really hold up, and when they tried to bring the one forward, they kind of messed it up pretty bad. So Blizzard is a really great developer. They've made some questionable business practices recently, but they're a really great developer. When they make a game, more often than not, it becomes the game of that genre. World of Warcraft is the MMO. Overwatch is the hero shooter. You know, StarCraft is the RTS. Like, when you think of those genres, those are probably the first ones that come to mind, and deservedly so. They're really good. But Blizzard has never focused on the narrative, despite the fact that that's sort of the direction that the video games industry is going right now. Like, and you don't even have to follow existing characters or tell stories that have already been told in admittedly not very great ways. You could just do like a Mass Effect style RPG in the World of Warcraft universe, where you could create your own character, and then you just collect a cast of fun, interesting, well-voiced characters and take on some big bad. It doesn't even have to be someone as big as like Deathwing or Arthas. It could just be, hey man, we've got to take out Van Cleef. And you know what? I bet that would be a really interesting story, but just no one has bothered to tell it, and I don't understand why. Number 4 is Game of Thrones, which did get some games. I think there were a handful of like weird mobile games. There was that RPG on the 360 that was really bad, and an equally bad Telltale game, but overall nobody has really done anything substantial with the Game of Thrones license as far as video games is concerned. And that's crazy to me, because regardless of how you feel about the way that show ended, there's no denying that Game of Thrones was a national craze for multiple years, and for good reasons. You know, the characters were really interesting. The world was extremely deep and interconnected in ways where, you know, somebody doing something over here had all these ripple effects that you could logically follow, because as a world it just kind of made sense. And there's so many stories that you could tell in the Game of Thrones world that just no one is telling for some reason. I mean, you even look at George R. R. Martin, and it looks like he's not gonna finish the book series anytime soon, so why not help him out and sort of fill in the gaps? Make a game that sort of plays like Skyrim but takes place during Robert's Rebellion, or make a sort of more focused like narrative survival game about some wildlings trying to, you know, avoid the army of the dead and the Night King as they make their way down to the wall, or do like an Oberyn Martell game where you just go on like fun misadventures in Dorne with the Sand Snakes, and it's just kind of like a fun Uncharted style thing. Like, there's so many possibilities of what you could do with the Game of Thrones universe, and just nobody's doing anything. And I assume that some of that, at least, is because after that last season, a lot of people just sort of collectively turned off their enjoyment of the rest of the Game of Thrones universe, which I agree that last season wasn't very good, but like, you can't deny how great the rest of it was. So why is no one doing anything with this IP? I don't understand it. Number 3 is Pirates of the Caribbean, which I think only ever got games as were directly related to the movies. And that's a real shame, because really the thing that attracts me the most to Pirates of the Caribbean as a franchise is that really fun combination of like historical piracy with just the right amount of like sea mysticism. You know, you get things like Calypso and the Pieces of Eight and the Fountain of Youth and Davy Jones and like all that really fun stuff, but you've also got like the India East Trade Company and like the British and all that shit, and it just connects in a way that's really satisfying to me for some reason. You know, everybody likes pirates, and there's been some really popular pirate games. You know, Assassin's Creed Black Flag was extremely popular, but it didn't have any of that fun mysticism to it. I mean, there was some stuff with like sages and weird Assassin's Creed stuff, but it wasn't like interesting pirate magic. And then, you know, you get things like Sea of Thieves, which does have some of that, but there's really just not a narrative going on there. So it's kind of just like going on fun adventures with your friends. And like both of those games are fine, but I just want to build up my fun crew of mixed match pirates and just have adventures on the high sea. And there's really just no game right now that does that for me. And considering how popular pirates are, I don't understand why that's the case. And I can't think of a better IP to leverage into that universe than Pirates of the Caribbean. Number 2 is The Wizard of Oz. Now, hear me out, because I imagine a lot of you went like, Wizard of Oz? What the hell is this guy talking about? Give me a chance. The Wizard of Oz has this really interesting, like, twisted fairy tale thing going on that's could be really cool, but in the movies and everything, we just never really get a great sense of what's going on in that world, which is good from a developer standpoint, because that means that you can kind of do whatever you want with it. You know, you could have a different character, because don't follow Dorothy. We know that story. It's good, but it's not a video game. Have somebody else get transported to Oz, and they have to take out some other twisted bad fantasy character. You know, doesn't have to be a witch. It could be anything. It could be some kind of like skeleton lord, or like Humpty Dumpty, but he's a bad egg. You know, like anything. And it could be really fun. I mean, don't take itself too seriously and just kind of explore all the possibilities that being in this twisted fairy tale world could bring with it, you know? Or even just tell the story like of the wizard, you know? Play as him and figure out, you know, what happened to turn him into the Wizard of Oz, and do it better than that really bad movie that came out a couple years ago. And number 10 is The Mist. And I know that probably the first thing that people are going to think of is like, well, wouldn't that just be like Silent Hill? And kind of. But whereas Silent Hill is more of like a sort of psychological thing where the monsters are all manifestations of your nightmares or horrible things that you've done in your life, in The Mist, the monsters are just strange creatures from a different dimension. So you get more of like, instead of a horror vibe, well, it is still horror, but instead of a psychological horror vibe, it's a sci-fi horror vibe. And while we know that Konami is kind of shopping around the Silent Hill franchise, trying to get other people to make games for them, if that doesn't pan out, Silent Hill might kind of be dead. So why not let somebody else take a similar IP and make something more interesting out of it? You know? The Mist, when you watch that movie, there's some really cool things going on. You've got that small town America setting, and you just kind of twist it into being like, this is all a very familiar setting, but it's just extremely dangerous, and you don't know what could possibly be around the corner. Like, there's absolutely no rules of what these monsters could be. I mean, you look at the movie Monsters, and it's like, what is that? What is that? and so it's just so much possibility of like a really interesting sort of survival horror style game where you could kind of get to the root, figure out like, what was the military doing up in those hills? Maybe go up there and like shut it down and save the town. Maybe instead of playing like Silent Hill, it kind of feels more like a Alan Wake type thing. And I think it could be really, really great. But anyway, that's 10 of the franchises that I think have a real untapped potential in the video game space. And I'm sure there's a couple hundred others that you guys can probably think of, and I would love to hear what you wish there was a game of down in the comments below. And while you're down there, why not give it a like, share it with a friend, or better yet, subscribe to the channel, because your support really does mean a lot to me. But until next time, I'll see you around.